Hello, so today we're going to be doing a tier list on every unit in set 13 of TFT. So when I say a tier list, basically I'm going to rank them relative to the others of the same cost. So I'm going to rank all the 1 costs relative to each other, the 2 costs, 3 costs, 4 costs, and 5 costs. So this is going to be a mostly for fun tier list, of course. I just want to make sure, this is for fun content. I'm going to flash the disclaimer a couple times here on the screen. Every unit does have a purpose, and there's many different ways to bring them out. But this is going to be a little bit of my opinion, units that I'm excited to play and excited to see, and units that I think accomplish the job from which they are good for their relative cost, right? Are 1 cost good early game and then transition well into late game, maybe reroll lines that work? Are 5 costs good at capping out a board? Are they something you can splash on that does a lot of damage that helps out your board relative to some of the other ones? Anyways, if you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. But yeah, we're just going to do this for fun content in alphabetical order. I'm going to go through them. So, first of all, Amumu. I think Amumu's solid, A tier. I think Automata isn't as good anymore, but I think Amumu is one of the best early game units to tank. Watcher is just very strong at the early and mid game points of the game. And also Darius, I think, is also A tier. I'm always happy to see these Watcher units, and I feel like I can make a pretty stable front line around them. So we're going to put them in A. Maybe we'll shift stuff a little bit later. Draven, I think Draven's a solid C tier in my opinion. I feel like relative to many other backline units, he doesn't do all that much. I think it's really hard to play around Draven early unless you're trying to play around some sort of pit fighter and or AD line. He's good at item holding, so you can argue that he's B tier, but for me I'll put C tier. Irelia right now, I think Irelia is somewhere between A and B. It's hard to say. I think a lot of the 1 costs are very well balanced. One thing I will say about this set, relative to most of the sets that I've played, this is one of the best balanced sets that I've ever seen. So you're going to see a lot of clumping of units, very close together a lot. I think that most units have their roles and have their places, and I think at all costs, the units are very well balanced. So that's something I just want to say. Throw a bone out to the dev team who did a really good job. Lux got a little bit nerfed, but I think Lux solid A tier. I don't think she's anything super broken. I'm not looking at her and thinking to myself, yep, I'm going to win the game for free. Maddie, I think, is B tier. Maddie's either B tier or A tier. I think that Maddie's a little bit unreliable early game unless you have Vertical Enforcer in. So it's not something that I always want to play around, but she's probably a little bit of a better holder of units or items than Darius. I don't think she's really good where I think that I'm going to keep her into my stage 2 and, deep into my stage 2 and into my stage 3. A lot of times I'll want to switch those on to other AD units, which I think are a lot better. So she's somewhere around B, maybe bottom A. But when I think about her and what she accomplishes, Maddie is the perfect example of a 1 cost. You can reroll her in some spots if you have a really good spot and she'll be okay. You can item hold her for a while and she'll be okay. In certain spots she also thrives if you play Vertical Enforcer, so her synergies are nice. But for the most part she's just average to me. I think that's what I expect out of a 1 cost in most cases. Morgana I think is also in around B tier. I think there was a lot of buffs with Visionaries. She's somewhere, I think she's a little bit better than Maddie, but she's somewhere in this area. I think she does a really good job, really good synergies. You're often playing her in a late game board, so you can transition out of her or have her as an item holder. I just feel compared to some of the other AP backliners, she's not as relevant, so I would prefer to if early game I had a Lux or a Zyra, which we'll get to Zyra later, I'd rather play around those units. So I think she's more in the B tier area. Powder's weird. I think Powder's a B tier now. I think Scrap is so prevalent and it's so useful to hold on to Powder and have her as an item holder, especially with the buffs into late game. I think she has a lot of usage to be relevant in the current meta. I don't think reroll Powder is that good. I think Family got a lot of changes, but I still don't think she's quite there. But she's definitely not I think I would be more excited to hold on to Powders than I would Draven's. Maybe Draven deserves to be up here. We're going to bump Draven up. Draven's around the same tier as this. I think the 1 costs are all relatively balanced. It's just a matter of opinion on which ones you play. Singed I think is Singed is either S tier or A tier. I don't know. I'm willing to put Singed in A tier as well, I guess. Singed is so good because of his passive effect. His extra effect. His extra effect of giving attack speed is so relevant on a lot of reroll comps that it makes Singed really broken. Basically what happens with Singed is that he'll take the unit that does the most damage and give them some extra attack speed that scales off AP. It's so strong. So not only is he Sentinel where you can play him deep into late game, a lot of times you're dropping him late game, so Singed isn't the greatest in terms of tankiness. But the utility that it gives you is so good, not only early game, but also in your mid game. There's lines with Zeri reroll where you play around Sentinels because of the Singed buff that's really strong. Renata reroll, you play around the Singed buff because it's really strong. he's just a really solid 1 cost. The effect is like quirky, like a little bit different, and it's very relevant. So just for that, like, you know, it's somewhere between like A and S, for sure. Steb's also A tier. I think Steb's a really good frontline unit. If you get a Steb upgrade, you can usually tempo it very well into your mid and late game. I think the Trundle is kind of awkward. I'm willing to put Trundle like also an A. Everybody's kind of A tier. The 1 costs are very well balanced in my opinion. I feel like most of them you can either play around. They accomplish their job as a tank. Trundle, Scrap, really relevant, especially late game. Often you're never dropping Trundle. Really good early game. You can often streak if you have a Trundle 2. Of course, if you have a 1-star version, he's not going to be as strong. Same with Steb. I think Steb's in a good spot as well. I feel like Steb, especially with Enforcer being a little bit more relevant, is also good. Definitely not like top of A tier. It's not like, it's like roughly ordered here, but it's not like strictly ordered, so to speak. So I think it's all right. Often you'll play around as Steb, just get a bruiser front line. It's pretty good for your early game. Vex is like around the same area as Lux. I think Vex does a lot of damage. Really good AP item holder. If you're trying to angle yourself towards an AP line, has some relevancy later in the game, right? Because you often could play around Vex reroll if you're playing Visionaries. Visionaries got a little bit of a buff. I think if I'm trying to find an item holder, you know, Morgana, more so I want to put utility items on because she's really good spreading the damage. Vex is really good at just doing some burst in a lot of cases, so I'm pretty happy to have a Vex on my board. Usually if you're playing an AP opener, a Lux 2 or a Vex 2 is typically your itemizing. Violet. I think Violet's like somewhere here. She's like around the same tier as like Draven. Violet is a little bit awkward to play around. She got nerfed a lot. I don't think family reroll is that strong. I don't think she has that much relevancy late game because pit fighters themselves are a little bit meh right now. Pit fighters has been meh for a while, but it started off by being very prevalent because of how strong Violet was in the first place. So I can understand that, you know, a couple patches, pit fighters are not going to be that great just because it went from being like one of the best comps, and then, you know, there's like a little bit of swinging the way patches are balanced from time to time. So I expect her to be a bit more relevant. I'm sure there's going to be pit fighter buffs somewhere along the lines later on in the set. So if you're a misser, if you miss Violet, then yeah, but a lot of people are annoyed with her, but it's fine. She's good at holding melee items though. I feel like you're often better off with like a 2 cost or a 3 cost that you can hold the items with. Not the greatest of item holders, but she's definitely up there in the same tier as everybody else. And then Zyra, I think Zyra's A tier for sure. I think Zyra's like the same as Lux. You get a Zyra 2, you feel pretty confident. You can usually streak that into your mid game, play around Sorks. She also has some synergies and some use late game because she has stun. If anything, Zyra might be somewhere between in S tier. But I think that among 1 costs, I think this is a pretty reasonable take. If I want to like super separate them, right? Like if I want to like exacerbate it based on like where these units are, I would say something like, you know, Zyra, Trundle, like this, and then like maybe like this, right? If I want to separate it a little bit more, I would do this, but I don't want to do this because it's a little bit misleading. I think they are all around the same power level, depending on what you hit, right? It's very spot dependent. So I'm pretty happy with 1 cost. I think before there was a lot wilder of a swing because last time I did the tier list, Violet was giga broken, so it was like a huge separation. But roughly, there's like a couple that are a little bit less likely or less like happy that you see, but a lot of times you can play around anything as long as you get your unit pairs and you can play around them. So I'm really happy with 1 cost. 2 costs now. So 2 costs, I think there's a little bit more discrepancy between a lot of the units. Starting with Akali, I think Akali's like, you know, we'll just start her off in B tier. I think Akali, AP melee user, has potential to be really good, but I feel like she just never pops off. She's always like the lesser synergy trait to like the other units that you normally play. I find that even now, like much later in the game, she's not much more improved relative to some of the other units. In terms of quick strikers, you know, it's usually like TF or Nocturne. She's always like second candle. And you just roll for her because it's efficient, but not really because she actually does anything. So very mid. Even in terms of item holding, I think she's kind of mid. I'm down to put her in C tier. It's just a little bit awkward because there's some points where she's really good. Like she has some good synergies with Quick Striker and Rebel. So she's somewhere between B and C, but we'll see how it shapes up after everybody else. Camille, actually, I think it should be like this. I'm gonna be a little bit harsher with 2 costs because I think there is more discrepancy with the 2 costs when I see them. In terms of like units, I think Akali's more closer to C tier. Camille is closer to B tier. She's like very mid. She's very average. When I think of a 2 cost and I think about Camille, she's like good holding items mid game, maybe reroll, pretty relevant if you end up doing the full reroll line, but not like the main carry a lot of the time. Like the way I look at Camille is like the same way I would look at Akali in terms of just playing her for synergy or item holding, but at the same time, Camille is also capable of popping off in certain situations, especially with certain Ornn artifacts. So I think there is a difference between Camille and Akali if we're talking about like who is like more relevant if you're talking about a late game board. So that's why I'll put it here. Also, I think in terms of like synergies like Enforcer and Ambusher, you have a lot more to look forward to rather than Akali, which kind of fits in a little bit awkwardly, right? She's like AP, and a lot of times with Quick Strikers, you're playing AD unless you're playing TF, but then if you're playing TF, you're not really rolling for Akali, you're rolling for TF and Loris. So it's just like, it's a bit clumsy. Camille works really well because if you make Camille items and you want to play around ambushers, a lot of times you can just put that on a Smeech 3 if you hit Smeech 3 later. She's a good item holder. Melee items are just good in general. She also could, like, you know, some of them, if you take the generic healing items, they also work really well on Echo. So it kind of works out nicely, I think. Leona Academy, I think she's like A tier. I think Sentinels are really strong. I think Leona is relatively good. She got buffed recently. I feel like it's noticeable. She seems quite tanky in a lot of the fights that I'm playing with her. So I'm pretty happy with Leona. Academy, you just got a lot of tempo early game. She's usually a unit that you at least want to consider playing on your board almost always. So that definitely puts her in A tier because of the flexibility of Sentinels in general. Like there's AD lines that use Sentinel, AP lines that use Sentinel, and Academy just gives you an item early. It's just good. Nocturne, without artifacts, he's around here probably. With artifacts, he's around here. So let's average it out and say these around A tier. I think Nocturne is a really good item holder, really strong unit for mid game. I'm more inclined to put him at top of B just because I feel like it's a little bit misleading. I think as a quick striker, this unit is very strong. I think with Ornn artifacts, obviously he's S tier. If you get Nocturne with range, he just broken, he breaks the game. It's still good. It got nerfed a lot, but it's still like really relevant, especially for a 2 cost. I wouldn't really play around Nocturne if I didn't have the like Ornn artifacts, which is why I put him more closer to B tier. He's similar to like Camille. If you just hit a Nocturne 3 for free, then it's gonna be good and you can just use it to tempo, but it's like way less prospects than Camille. And I think that in terms of like playing around Nocturne or Akali, a lot of times Nocturne does way more damage than Akali in those type of quick striker setups. So I think that there should be a differentiation. He'll be around the Camille angle, like somewhere around here. I think Camille is better though, for sure. But I think this is fair. Rel's A tier, really flexible. Has like a little bit of like an armor reduction effect as well. So she has good utility, especially early game. She's also quite tanky, really good in rerolls, usually the last unit that's dropped. Leona is more like flexible in terms of like playing reroll versus not reroll. Rel is really flexible because not only can you play her in non-reroll, you can also play her in reroll because she's usually the main visionary sentinel that you can play around if you're playing around Renata. And speaking of Renata, she's right here. I'll put Renata in A tier. I think good synergies, good damage. I think 6 visionary is a good reroll comp right now. So she's definitely something that I look forward to, either item holding early game or playing around late game. It's awkward to rank Renata all the time because she's also Chem Baron. So a lot of times you're holding on to Renata just with the prospect of maybe teching in Chem Baron in certain cases. But she's definitely like a step above. Like if I was considering all of these as reroll units and not just for the utility and synergies, Renata is definitely a step above. Like that reroll comp is a little bit better than Quick Striker or specifically Camille in Ambushers. I think that Renata, if I'm trying to think about how comfortable I am with the board, especially with the 6 visionary change that just happened, I'll put her in A tier. Set's the same thing. I think Set's a really good frontline unit. The stun is really good at swaying fights early game. Right, whenever we're ranking these low-cost units, we not only have to consider their prospects late game, we have to consider prospects early game as well. So that's why I'm saying in reroll lines, in non-reroll lines, how happy am I to see it, effects that they have early game. Set's somebody who's really good in your mid game. Set is a mid-game demon. It's not something you normally want to play late game unless you're playing Rebels. It's not like Set's like a Giga Tank that he just blocks everything. Maybe a Set 3 is pretty good with 6 Bruiser. I'm sure there's use cases for it. But early game, Set is a monster because in those early game fights, just getting a stun off in all of stage 2 and all of stage 3, it can be make or break. You can just win the game off of him. Well, not specifically win the game, more like win the round, but you know what I mean. It can sway fights in a dramatic way, having that much utility in terms of stunning. So I have a lot of like, I think he has a lot of chutzpah. I'm like, yaps, I like this unit, and I prefer to play him a lot. Tristana's S tier. Emissary unit, a lot of times you're just playing a Tristana at all stages of the game because it buffs your whole board. It gives your whole board attack speed. If you see her early game, you can use her as an item holder. She scales, so if you have her early, you can always commit to a reroll if you get a lot of stacks. If you don't get a lot of stacks, she's still okay to hold items, right? In terms of AD units, if you need an AD item holder, she's good at holding all of the AD items. She works well with attack speed. She also works well with crit items. She works well with damage amp items. If you're strictly going for reroll options, she is a rerollable meta unit. She is a little bit fallen off to her other counterpart, which we'll talk about in a couple seconds because I see that he's next up. So she's not like as broken as a reroll unit, but her utility outshines almost everybody on this tier list. So she's definitely it's not this specific 2-cost tier list because the emissary bonus is massive. A lot of times if you're like leveling up and you're like, what should I play when I level up? A lot of times you're looking for synergies, but a lot of times you have empty space on your board. It's like, okay, I have like an extra spot here. Who should I play? A lot of times it ends up being an emissary unit, and a lot of times it ends up being Tristana, just giving everybody attack speed. Early game, mid game, late game, she's always has some sort of relevancy, which is quite interesting. There's also like creative lines you can play with her. Like I've seen Academy with Tristana instead of Corki. If you have a Tristana that's scaling early, something with Starry Night. There's lots to be done. She's just solid S tier, above average for sure, well above A tier. Urgot somewhere up here as well. I think Urgot's like the strongest 2-cost reroll if I were to pick one. I think Urgot is just so reliable. Even with nerfs, he's still broken. Ornn artifacts, there's a lot of them that are good on him. Namely, what's it called? Innervating Locket, absolutely broken on Urgot. Unleash the Beast just makes this like a Giga unit where he just wins the game for free. A lot of times you just go first if you see Unleash the Beast and you have a spot to play Urgot. It's even forceable in a lot of spots because of how strong it is. This unit is just not okay. Doesn't have as much utility, obviously. Like, Urgot's not going to be the best unit to play all the time. However, Urgot does have the utility that he sunders. He, on top of everything that I'm mentioning here, if you're not trying to play Urgot reroll, a lot of times you can just play an Urgot to get some early game sundering. What that does is it reduces armor and helps out the rest of your board. So, of course, he's going to be in the S tier. The same, like, Tristana gives a little bit extra in terms of, like, the attack speed and being emissary. But if you're talking about, like, a solid unit, like, Urgot might even be a tier above, just how broken it is, in my opinion. Vander, I think Vander's unkillable. Call me lame or call me stupid, I don't know, I don't really care. But I think Vander is A tier for sure. I don't think he's giga broken, but I think he's just solid. I think Vlad as well is pretty solid. A lot of good synergies. Watcher and Sorks, he's really good at being able to do some sort of frontline, and Black Rose. Vladimir is not like Vander in the sense of like being like a giga frontline watcher that's just hard to kill. I think Vander is like beyond like giga tank. Like if I ever see a Vander 3, I know that that guy's gonna live for a very long time. Vlad is less like that. I think Vlad has some extra like chutzpah if you have like Crimson Pact or Sorks or stuff like that, where he does a little bit of more tanking and damage, tanking or damage depending on the situation. But the thing with Vlad is that because he's Black Rose, a lot of times he is a unit that you're keeping all the way until the end of the game. He is one of the better frontline units because of his utility of because of his board helping ability in his synergies. Really relevant at all stages of the game because of that. So he's definitely in the A tier with many of the others. Like I said, these aren't like strictly ordered. Maybe I'll go back at the end of the video and order them a little bit, just as like a rough rule of thumb. Zeri's a little bit hard to gauge. I'm going to put Zeri in A tier. Now, I'm going to explain my thought process here, right? Zeri is very strong, and I think she's very reliable at doing a bunch of damage. However, she is not flexible in her items. So Zeri reroll is very strong, and I have faith in Zeri reroll. There's some people that don't believe in Zeri reroll. I understand that. I believe in Zeri reroll a little bit. Like I said, you know, we're going to flash the list again. This is mostly for fun. Every unit can have use. But when I think about Zeri, I don't like her as a mid-game unit a lot of the time. So she's A tier because of how much I like her as a reroll unit. But she's not like that good outside of reroll. I think Firelight is really good. I think playing her to play around Echo is very strong. I think playing her to use her as a utility unit. So for example, if you put Morello or Red Buff on her, she spreads it really well to the backline because she has a zap effect. So she's really good as like an auxiliary unit to your board if you're trying to play around snipers or if you're trying to play around Firelight. But other than that, like putting items on her, like AD items, if you don't give her attack speed, a lot of times it's like almost griefing your mid game, right? Like if you think about some of the other units like Tristana, you can put big damage on her and she'll still do a lot of damage. A lot of times with Zeri, if you don't have something that's like a bow item on her, she kind of just sits there and does nothing. So it feels really awkward. Of course, her reroll line's really good. If you're playing around attack speed AD, she's really good as an item holder. And if you have utility items, she's a really good utility item holder. However, that's why she's not S tier, is what I'm trying to say. Is because, like, I don't find her to be as flexible in my mid games, which sometimes hurts her. Like, when I'm thinking of a 2 cost, I want the mid game to be flexible with these units, because a lot of times, if you're not always rerolling them, you want to use a 2 cost as a stepping stone to get a 3 cost, to get a 4 cost, to slowly strengthen your board and convert yourself into a powerful board. And I feel like that stepping stone part of her kit is not quite there. But maybe that's just me. Ziggs I think is like A tier as well. I think really good at spreading damage. He got nerfed a lot, so he's not as good as reroll. I think a couple patches ago, it would have been Ziggs' S tier for sure. Like between my tier lists, like, you know, I think between my tier lists, Ziggs was like meh. Then he got like really broken, and now he's like meh again. I don't think he's as bad as like Camille, Nocturne, Akali in terms of items. I think he's a lot easier to hold AP items with, and he's scrap, so it can lean itself really well into some strong late game boards. So I'm going to put him also in A tier. These are like roughly ordered, but not really, so don't worry too much about it. But overall, I think the balance of 2 costs is pretty good. I think there's some of them that, you know, you kind of feel awkward playing around, especially in your early game and your mid game. I could separate a little bit more. Obviously, like if I separate a little bit more, it would be something maybe like, I don't know, like this maybe. Hard to say. But for sake of it, for sake of how it is, I'm going to put them back where I had them. All right, 3 costs. Time to go through some 3 costs. Blitzcrank, I think, is B for Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank went from being like really strong and relevant in the Automata line to now once again being kind of meh because Automata got nerfed a lot. I don't think Blitzcrank 3 does anything on a lot of boards unless you're playing around Vertical Automata, which I think is significantly worse unless you have an emblem. He doesn't have late game prospects. A lot of times you're dropping him for other Dominators if you're trying to play on Dominators. And Automata is kind of more locked to reroll because all of the units are very low cost. You're usually not trying to tempo level 9 play around Malzahar for Automata. So it's not what it used to be. It's a little bit awkward to play around, and he's not like a reliable front line. A lot of times, like if I have a Blitzcrank 2 or I have a Mundo 1 or a Garen 1, a lot of times I'm looking at my board and I'm thinking to myself, I probably want to itemize the Garen or the Mundo and not the Blitzcrank. So it's a little bit awkward. So I definitely put him in B tier. I think he can accomplish the job of a 3 cost. I think especially early game, if you have a Blitzcrank and you have Automata in, he could do really well on like a stage 2 and a stage 3. But once you get past that stage, you're kind of donezo. So I don't think he's like C tier because I still think he has like good tankiness, and he has this damage nullification effect where like units that hit him do less damage. So sometimes it feels like he's doing some sort of impact on the board. So he's nice to have, but he's not like bad by any means. He's just not good. He's very like if I'm thinking of like the most average unit I can think of, like maybe he's a little bit below average, but I think that's too much of a stretch for me at least. Cassiopeia, same thing. I think Cassiopeia is really strong in certain situations. However, she's pretty useless in a lot of other ones. She got like an attack speed buff, so I wanted her to be kind of good. But once again, like rerolling her isn't that great. Maybe in some Black Rose line, she's really good because with 4 Black Rose, you get a little bit of amp. And then sometimes with Dominator's Black Rose, she can be like a secondary unit holder. But a lot of times, she's very mid. You're going to transfer the items off of her. She doesn't attack that fast, so I find like a lot of times if I have her early game, even compared to Blitzcrank, right? If I have her like on stage 2, I'd rather maybe itemize like a Lux 2 or a Zyra 2. Like, you know, like there's other units I'd rather itemize that I think will do better damage than the Cassiopeia. Obviously, if you high roll a Cassiopeia 2, that's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is like a Cassiopeia 1, for most stages of the game, is kind of like it feels like a throw almost if you're trying to like play around her too heavily. So I'm definitely putting her in B tier for that reason. However, she does have good prospects late game, so that's what I mean. It's like a trade-off, so that's why she's like average, not bad. Ezreal, I think Ezreal is like either S tier or A tier. I think we're going to put Ezreal in S tier. I'm not sure. Let's put him in A tier for now. Ezreal does a shit ton of damage. A lot of times when you're playing around Academy, Ezreal is your main item holder for much of the game. He's really strong early game, really strong on stage 3. Artillerist, he does a good amount of work in your mid game. Academy items helps you to tempo very heavily. I don't think he's like giga broken because Ezreal reroll is kind of like a throw. I think when 3 costs really shine is when you can also reroll them, because that kind of brings them elevation up 1 notch, right? Because like if you have a bunch of Ezreals, a lot of time you don't really want to roll for Ezreal 3. Sometimes if you just natural in Ezreal 3, like if you're playing Academy and you just happen across a bunch of Ezreals while looking for Jace, looking for Heimer, it can cap out your board very high. But it's not something that you're like starting the game out and saying, ooh, this is an Ezreal game. He's more so like he's good on stage 2, good on stage 3, good on late game boards, definitely above average, definitely A tier. But he's not somebody that's like, this is the unit that I'm going to ride or die. He's going to win me the game here. That's why he's A tier. Gangplank. Gangplank, I think he's S tier. I think Gangplank's S tier. If I had to pick one, I'd put Gangplank in S tier. So S tier, like, this unit does so much damage. A lot of times you can stabilize a scrap board by just playing a Gangplank 2. You can even play multiple Gangplank 2s. This guy does so much damage. He scales so hard. 4 Form Swapper, Gangplank is just broken. If you have 3-star Gangplank and you hit 4 Form Swapper, you basically win the game. It's not something you can really reroll for because he's so high roll, right? Because if you're rerolling Gangplank, you also have to hit Jace. And Jace is like, everybody buys Jace. So it's kind of hard to like play around 4 Form Swapper because it caps out when a 5 cost. There's no emblems. There's no nothing that can help you with that. But he's strong as shit. Like, actually, like it's absurd that I think in PBE I played Gangplank and I said this unit does an absurd amount of damage, and it's like halfway through the set. So like that was like a couple weeks, a whole half a set. And this Gangplank unit is still, like, I look at him, I'm like, holy crap. Like, if you see a Gangplank, you should almost always play around it. They even buffed frontline Gangplanks. You can even use him as a melee item holder now, and he's not even that bad. So, I think Gangplank, all stage of the game, really strong. A lot of times you can just, like, stay with him on stage 4 as well. You don't even have to reroll him. You can use him to tempo to 9. You can use him to tempo and stabilize until you hit the rest of your board if you're playing Scrap, or if you're playing Emissaries, or if you're playing something else. Just insane. Insane unit, for sure. Kog'Maw B tier. I think Kog'Maw kind of fell off from the days of past. Kog'Maw used to be very broken, but I think now you very rarely want to play around Kog'Maw. He's usually like at most a secondary carry. He's good at holding items in your early game, right? Obviously, like if you have like Econ Generation, like what's it called? Gambler's Blade, he's still good, but it just kind of lacks a lot because of how they nerfed 4 Automata. The only time you really play him is 6 Automata, and then obviously 6 Automata you become somewhere up here. But in your average case, I think he's more of a B tier unit. Loris, I think Loris is A tier. Solid Sentinel unit, very strong, very tanky. They fixed the bug where he just runs away, so now he's not even that bad to play around in your mid game. Just good, reliable unit. Has good late game board synergies. Enforcer, he's like the main tank in Enforcer, and he's quite tanky in those situations. 6 Sentinel, he's quite tanky. A lot of times, if you can't find a Lowy, Loris is your next go-to main tank to stabilize if you're trying to play a Sentinel frontline. I think he's great, so definitely A tier. Nami, S tier for sure. I think Sork reroll, she's broken. I think outside of Sork reroll, she's still good because Emissary, she gives your whole team a mana buff, which is very nice. It's helpful for everybody almost always. Her synergies are good because of the Sork and the Emissary. She also does good damage if you 3-star her. She does good damage mid-game and early game if you have her as 1 or 2-star. A Nami on stage 1 is ridiculous. A Nami on stage 2 is ridiculous. She also has AoE, so if you give her utility items, she has relevancy because she hits multiple units. So a lot of times you could put Morello on her. You could put other items on her that you want to spread, like even red buff or something. It's totally fantastic. She's just solid, best, like one of the best 3 costs. I think if I see her in shop and I have AP items, I'm almost always buying her no matter what my board is because she'll always help out in some way. Nunu. This is Nunu. Nunu's like a B tier. I don't know where Nunu falls. It's hard to say. Nunu, I think, needs a buff. I feel like out of all the tanks, Nunu is kind of awkward in that it doesn't quite, like, they don't quite do that much. It's like, it's pretty good. Like, I've had 3-star Nunu before, and it's like, alright. I think with like 6 Bruiser Nunu, it's like, it's pretty good. But I think it's just like not as good as like some of the other units. Like, honestly, Nunu is so, like, whatever that I'm willing to do something like this. Like, think there needs to be some separation between like these ones and Nunu. Right? Because Nunu's not quite A tier. And he's definitely, I think Nunu's definitely a little bit better than these units because of the synergies with Experiment, synergies with Bruiser. A lot of times the Nunu, you can, he's really good early game. That's the thing. He's not that good late game. I don't think you really want to reroll towards him. There's not like a reroll bruiser line that kind of works that well. But his synergies are nice. And Visionary got buffed, so I think sometimes you play him with Visionaries now. I think I'm a Nunu over believer, so I'm going to make this separation. So when I say C tier, it just means like a little bit below average, right? This C tier isn't like a hard C tier. It's not like these units suck. It's more so like there's just a distinction between Nunu and these ones, if that makes sense. Rennie, however, Rennie's A tier for sure. This Rennie unit is busted. Holy shit, the stun on her, insane. Super tanky, stun, Chem Baron, so you always have the win condition. If you're hitting Rennie and you're playing around the win condition, that factors in a little bit. Super relevant on late game boards because the stun still works. As long as she gets a stun off, she just removes a unit from the game. Really strong into melee opposition because she just removes them for a while. Definite A tier. Scar B tier. I think really good tank. I don't think quite as good as A tier. I think with Firelight, a lot of times now people don't even roll for Scar 3 anymore because you're usually rolling for Zeri. I think he has good late game synergies and he has good opportunity to be really broken. He has good reroll potential as well, but I think he's very average. Maybe I'll just put him in A tier. I think A tier. He is better than Nunu, so we'll put him in A tier, but he's not like that broken, so we'll just keep him up there. Smeech. Smeech is either A tier or S tier. I'm going to put him in A tier. I think Smeech is really good if you hit him as 3-star. I think he's really broken. The problem is, I think early game he's not that good. Maybe that's crazy for me to say. I think he's like borderline S tier because Smeech reroll is one of the strongest rerolls in the game, and it's absolutely absurdly broken. But it's also very high roll because a lot of times you're playing around Echo, you're playing around Jinx, you need to hit 5 Ambusher. The Smeech unit, if you don't hit Smeech 3, maybe we'll just put him in S. Is that fine? Like, guys, understand that I mean this or this, guys and gals. They, thems, everybody that watch my videos. It's either or. I'll just put him in S tier just to make it look nice. He kills units early game. That's the thing that makes him so great. Whether you're playing Chem Baron, which he is a Chem Baron, or you're playing any other board, he's just good early game because he kills units. He targets the unit with the lowest items when it's in range of his ult. So he's really good at just picking off a lot of these trash units that often can just live. So he saves you a lot of HP. And that's his utility early game. So you don't, even if you're not committing towards Smeech reroll, he's really good to just play to kill off units, especially if you have melee items. And then on top of that, he's just really reliable late game, especially if you hit Smeech 3. So I'll just keep him up there. Swain, however, Swain's giga busted. I think Swain's like the most broken unit in the game always. This unit, when he's a tank, he tanks forever. When he's a damage dealer, he does damage forever. He's form swapper. He caps high. You play him on almost every board. Like anytime you see a Swain, this unit is so good. You just always buy Swain. Early game, if somebody has a Swain, you just know they're win streaking stage 2. If somebody has a Swain 2, you know they're win streaking stage 3. If somebody has a Swain 2, you know they're probably win streaking stage 4 as well. And that's not even Swain 3. That's crazy. This unit is so good. Like I can't understand if anybody like even tries to argue that this guy is an S tier. Like it's crazy. TF I think is A tier. Good utility. Really good ability to hold AP items. Enforcer, you can also pop off really hard with Enforcer. There is a TF reroll line that people are trying out. I don't know how good it is because every time I see it, it doesn't seem that good. So he's not like S tier broken, but he's just really good at like being a utility holder. Like he has a stun, he spreads his damage, he attacks pretty fast, good synergies as well to stabilize your mid game. I think this TF unit is just really good to play around almost always. So I definitely put him in A tier. He's similar to like Ezreal, right? Like if you have a TF3 and you just find him, it's really good, but you don't necessarily want to commit right away, but maybe sometimes you do. So, you know. Anyways, I think this is good for 3 costs. Now, 4 cost time. I think this set, part of the reason why the balance feels so good, I think the 4 costs are all playable in different spots, right? Like, you know, of course we can say which ones are the good units and which ones are the bad units, but I think all the 4 costs have a spot where if you need to play for placements, you can play around almost all of them, which is very nice this set, but some of them are more conditional than others. We're going to start with Ambessa. I think Ambessa's A tier. It's debatable if she's A or S tier. I just feel like she's a little bit lackluster compared to some of the other units. I think, like, if you look at some of the units I'll put in S tier, I think that Ambessa doesn't do as much damage. She really needs a lot of help to support her. And they're all really hard to get to those points, right? You're either playing Conquerors, where you're playing Vertical Conqueror to make her pop off, you're playing like vertical emissary, which is really expensive and hard to make it work. And then, or you're playing, like, they're all very high roll, is what I'll say. She's a very high roll unit, right? If you're high rolling, she's S tier. If you're low rolling, she's not, she doesn't do anything. She griefs herself often, so you almost always need an Edge of Night, because she just dives the backline and just dies. So she's often hard to play around, but she has emissary, so she gives your whole board armor. So she's debatably S tier. I wouldn't be surprised if I move her up to S tier, just because of her emissary bonus being so good. Corki, I think Corki's A tier. Corki, really good damage dealer. Scrap, really relevant. Just good at spreading, so you can put utility items on him pretty often. Really relevant on multiple different lines. I think Corki is one of the better forecasts in the game right now. Mundo, I think Mundo's either A tier or B tier, but I'm willing to put him in A tier because I like him. Just really good tank. I think he's less conditional than some of the other tanks, so I definitely would put him up here. Echo, S tier. Every line that you play with Echo, he's one of the main damage dealers. Very good. The mana buff that they gave him was enough to make him very broken. I felt like Echo was already kind of okay in the past with certain synergies, but now if you're playing around like vertical ambusher, you can even tempo with Echo. If you're playing Scrap, which feels really relevant currently, then you can tempo with Echo. This Echo unit, you should almost always hold on to him. A little bit awkward if you don't have the right items, because he's like a melee AP user, so it's hard to transition from some of the other melee items you want to make, like Sterix and those type of things. But he works out really well, and in all the lines that you play him, he's usually like the sole AP extra unit. He also has like a lot of those like synergies, like Reunion and like the Heimer one, so you have like opportunity to play him with like hero augments as well. I think solid S tier. Elise A tier. Elise has a stun. Enough said. Garen, I think Garen's either S tier or A tier. I'll put him in A tier as well. I think Echo is just much better than these two in terms of like looking at a forecast. Garen, emissary bonus, really good. Watcher, really good. Solid front line. Often very contested, but you can usually play around him. The lines you play around him now aren't as relevant, but he's still a really good unit. You should almost always make him. Maybe I put Mundo down one. Yeah, I'm gonna put Mundo down one. Relative to these guys, like Echo is the best. These guys are all in their own tier, and then I think Mundo is like lagging a bit behind, so I'll put him in B tier. Heimer I put in B tier as well. I think Heimer is he used to be really broken, he used to be really strong. I think he's still quite strong. I think he's still playable for sure. Relative to the other ones, relative to the other forecasts, I mean, he has fallen off a lot, and a lot of that's because of optimization, right? Heimer was really strong at the start of the set because if people don't know how to optimize their damage, if you pick a unit that just scales really well into a fight, if the fight lasts really long, he'll do really well. That still holds true today. You can still play around Heimer and have a really good success and even go for a second or a first or a guaranteed top 4 if you have a good spot. It's not as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. Or, sorry, he's not as bad as a lot of people make him out to be. However, he has fallen off a lot, and a lot of it's just because people optimize better. If the fight doesn't last as long, Heimer doesn't get as much value. He doesn't scale as hard, and if he doesn't scale as hard, you lose the fight earlier, and Heimer doesn't do that much. Heimer takes time to do damage because he scales with casts. And if you don't have a situation where you can get him to scale those casts off really well, you're better off. And then it comes down to like, okay, you're better off just playing other comps then that do damage earlier. And it's like, yes, you're right, but you know, in terms of AP units, he's probably one of the more reliable AP units, so he's definitely up there. Alawi, really good tank. Sorry, I'm fixing my music. Alawi, really good tank. I think she's definitely an A tier. 6 Sentinel, really strong. Rebel, really strong. I think out of all the tanks, Alawi is that one where you look at her and you're like, when is this unit ever gonna die? And she just never dies, and you're just waiting for her to die, and she just doesn't die. It's like I'm gonna see my grandkids grow up and go to high school before I see Alawi die in a game. You know what I mean? Like, she just doesn't die. It's crazy. Silco, I think Silco's in the same tier as like Heimer and Mundo. He's like not that relevant, but he's still pretty strong. I definitely like to play around Silco still. It just feels kind of high roll. Because once again, he's a unit that scales, right? Dominators scale into fights. So if you have a lot of burst damage, especially with Echo being broken, right? Like right now, Echo's really strong, right? That's like the epitome of like what the set is starting to become, right? Echo is all about instant burst damage, right? He is an ambusher. He just crits and kills everything. And then Silco and Heimer, they scale. And it's like, okay, how do I scale when one of the best units is the one that explodes and kills everybody instantly? And it's like, I don't know, and that is the problem. But other than that, if you're in a spot and you can play around dominators, a lot of times it's really nice to play around it still. You can tempo with it. I definitely think it's reliable, and I definitely think it's strong. Twitch is the same way, right? Twitch doesn't ramp up. Twitch takes time to ramp up. But I think Twitch has more consistent damage than the other ones. I just don't think Twitch is A tier, because Twitch you have to commit early. Twitch you need to make a Guinsoo, so you don't have the flexibility that some of the other units provide. So it makes it a little bit more awkward to like plan your game around playing Twitch. Something like Corki, for example. Corki can make generic AD items, and those items could go on a Gangplank your mid game, it can go on a Corki late game. With Twitch, if you don't have a Guinsoo and you're playing Twitch, you're basically going 8th. So you need to, if you're trying to play around Twitch, you need to prioritize a Guinsoo at some point in the game, or you have to stumble into it to play it. And Twitch just got nerfed, right? I think Twitch last patch would have been A tier for sure, but because of the nerf, I'm a little bit more skeptical around playing these lines. Vi, I think Vi is really strong. She just has a stun, enough said, right? Same as Elise, you can just play her for the stun. Also good synergies and caps out really high late game. Zoe, I think Zoe's the worst out of all the AP units. Call me crazy, but I think Zoe isn't that good. I think Vertical Sork is contingent on you playing around Nami and Swain. Don't at me. Of course, right? I know that she's really good with Vertical Sork, but I'm just saying, I think that out of all the AP units, I don't want to start my game off and say, this is a Zoe game this time around. It's like, it feels so bad to play this unit all the time. Like Rebel, she feels bad. Sork, she feels okay, and you can stabilize really hard with Sorks, but a lot of the times it's like it feels really awkward. Like if you don't have a LeBlanc, and if you don't have like a Swain to frontline, or if you don't have like a Nami, like she needs somebody else to help her a lot of the time. So compared to the other units, like you could argue that she's like in the same tier as all of these guys, and I would be totally fine with that. So this is obviously personal opinion. If you think she should be here, we're the same, you know what I mean? But she's not here, and she's not here. Like nobody can convince me that. But I shouldn't say that, because I'm going to get a bunch of commenters that are all like, hey, Sork is broken. And it's like, no, it's not. It's like, it's good. Like, Sork is broken if you have Swain, right? Like, Swain does so much for that board. And if you have Swain 3, you win the game for free. Yes. It does not matter who the backline is, because you have Swain 3, right? It's like, but I think Zoe 2 with Sork, she still doesn't, she doesn't do enough for me to put her here. So I'll put her here just to make people happy. Fair. Enough said. This is me compromising, right? There we go. That's my forecast. As you can see, pretty well balanced. I'm pretty happy with it. It's just Echo right now is a little bit too strong. But I want everybody to understand, Echo was the shittiest unit, like the worst forecast for like most of the set. And only in the last recent couple patches has people been playing around Echo a lot. So I want people to just take a little deep breath. You know, let the dev team figure out whether Echo is broken or not. You know, there's going to be a patch in 2 weeks. That's not something that's egregious, right? It's not something that existed for a while. Like, you know, there's other things that are way worse, like Warwick encounter, or like the encounter rates in general. I think that's something that's like actually tilting. But like, you know, I see people, like some of you, like, you know, I know that it's like this guy's in S tier, I'm talking about how good he is, and all these other units I'm talking about how bad they are. But like, you know, it's only been like a week or two that Echo is actually super relevant. You know, it's okay. 5 costs. Last little section. Woohoo! Okay, so let's start. Caitlyn, I think is solid. I think Caitlyn's like B tier. Okay, when I look at a 5 cost, what I think about a 5 cost is not only how strong are they relative to their own traits, it's the same with like a lot of the other cost of units. 4 cost is typically what you're playing, that you're planning out your board. This is like the default board, so that's why they have to like stand on their own. 3 costs, 2 costs, and 1 cost are often stepping stones that set you up for the future of the game, which is why they are looked at in a different way in my opinion. 5 costs are the same way, except the opposite. When I look at a 5 cost, I think to myself, is this unit good to cap out my board that I just play on the board? Caitlyn is broken if you have 8 Enforcer, 6 Enforcer. She's giga broken. She has win conditions that are extremely strong in the game. She's very strong if you're playing snipers. Is she strong if you don't have anybody on your board? No, she fucking sucks. If you don't have perfect items for her, and if you don't like, she needs everything to be perfect. She is not like maybe she's arguably A tier. We'll see how this tier list like plays out as I add units onto the board. But she doesn't like, if you can't just throw her onto your board, right? A lot of times, like most boards, like 9 out of 10 times, if you go level 9 and you roll on level 9 odds and you see a bunch of 5 costs, how many of you are honestly buying Caitlyn to play a random Caitlyn on your board? Nobody. But part of the power of 5 cost is when you hit a 5 cost or you hit an upgraded 5 cost, you can structure your game around it and play that unit. So like if I roll on level 9 and I hit a random Caitlyn 2, am I just throwing a random Caitlyn 2 on my board? No, very rarely am I ever doing that. There's very few lines that work with it. It's very specific. Caitlyn is giga broken in her 1 lines, but she's not broken anywhere else. And that's what makes her a little bit awkward to me, which is why I put her in B tier. She's very average for a 5 cost. For a 5 cost, for a unit, she's obviously broken, right? Obviously, if you see a Caitlyn and you can play around Caitlyn, you buy Caitlyn. That's how all the 5 costs are. They're really strong. But what I'm saying is, relative to like the idea of like a 5 cost capping out your board, she is like one of the least usable 5 costs that are here compared to a lot of the other ones. So we're gonna go through them. Like Jace is S tier. He gives you a freaking crystal. Form swapper, really easy to fit in, really strong. Frontline Jace adds to frontline. Backline Jace adds to backline. AoE, put utility items on him. Has a crystal, extra frontline. Crystal, extra backline speed. Crystal, extra frontline shielding. AP scaling on the crystal, AD scaling on Jace. This guy is a beast. Like, do you know how, like, anytime you see a Jace, it doesn't matter what your board is, you can probably play Jace on your board if you have a spot for it. This unit is so good. He does so much. This is he's arguably like giga broken. Like, think of the 2 concepts, right? Jace versus Caitlyn. That's what I mean. Jinx is like here or here. I think Jinx is a little bit easier to fit in than Caitlyn. So I want to put her in A tier, but I'll put her in B tier as well. I think Jinx is the same. She does a lot of damage. She needs to scale into the fight. If you have a spot for like Rebel, she's really strong. If you have a spot for like Ambusher, she's really strong. Ambusher is a little bit more relevant, so maybe she's like here. But she's not a unit that you're always buying and always playing around, because she's a little bit particular and sometimes she does very little. I think she has more utility than Caitlyn, so I think she's better than Caitlyn, but I don't want to like put her in A tier. LeBlanc, however, is A tier for sure. LeBlanc is really broken the setups that you have her. LeBlanc is really good at holding certain items and utility items. She is an above average 5 cost for sure. I don't think she's as like tier broken as Jace is, for example, but I think that she is extremely good. She also has a damage amp effect, so a lot of times you can splash in a LeBlanc on any board that you have, and then she'll just multiply some of the damage that your team does. So definitely A tier, really strong frontline, really strong unit. Now Malzahar I think is also B tier. I think unless you have a really good spot, he's like B tier or A tier. I don't know. Maybe I do this. I'm really separating these 5 costs, but I think these are all in the same tier. Mordekaiser, A tier for sure. I think Mordekaiser is really broken, really strong in his setups. His synergies don't matter that much, right? Dominator gives him AP on his cast, but a lot of times you're only getting 1 cast off with Mordekaiser, so it doesn't give him that much AP, so Dominator doesn't really matter. And Conqueror really doesn't matter unless you're playing around Conqueror. A lot of times you just play a Mordekaiser just to do a broad frontline damage. He's like the king of built diff because his synergies don't matter and you just want him to attack. This unit does explosive damage, really strong. Often you just throw him in for fun and he will help out your board quite a bit. If you have a random Mordekaiser too, you can just put some frontline items or AP items. He's really flexible with those items. So it's just great. I think Mordekaiser is solid A tier. I think you can play him in a lot of spots. Rumble S tier. I think Rumble is arguably the best unit in the game. I think it all depends on how early you hit Rumble. The contingency about Rumble is like you have to hit him as early as possible because the upgrades basically allow you to win the game at one point. Scrap is really strong. So even late game, you get scrap in, you get that synergy. Even with 2 scrap, you convert some components, get some shielding. Really strong. I think he's just solid. Savika is probably B tier. But yeah, I think this is it's just a debate of who's more giga, Jace or Rumble. But typically this is what I think about when I think about like the best 5 costs that I always buy, no matter where I am and who I am and what my board is. It's always Jace, always Rumble. Rumble is probably the best one because of the synergies that he has. And if you hit him early, you can scale really well. So I think Rumble's like the best unit in the game by far. Jace is close up there. Then LeBlanc and Mordekaiser, these are units where LeBlanc very flexible, but unless you're playing like Vertical Sword, she doesn't really do that much. You usually don't itemize her, but she's really good at just like amplifying the effects on your board because she has this thing where she marks all the units and then she does like a blast based on how much damage they take, which includes the damage of your team. That's why I say damage amp. And then you have Mordekaiser, who's just a beast. And then everybody else is like pretty good, but they're like around B tier. Situationally, they're all really strong. And even Savika, maybe Savika is like, you can argue is a little bit lower. situationally they're strong. Malzahar may be a little bit lower, but Malzahar does like has utility, does some MR shredding, so that's why he's in B tier. But I think this is fair. Let's go through the tier list again. I think A tier, like most of the 5 costs are all like around average. There's not like a dominant 1 cost reroll or one of these that are dominant rerolls, so there's nothing that's like really broken like S tier, but I think they're all like pretty average and pretty nice to play around, so like all A, B tiers around what I expect. 2 costs, there's a couple that are a little bit stronger and weaker, but overall pretty average. Same with 3 costs, there's a couple that are really strong, a couple that are really weak, but mostly like pretty good balance. And then maybe like besides Echo, which arguably isn't even S tier, but for some people, but to me he's like seems really strong, really broken, but relatively good. They're just a little bit lower. Maybe these ones are a little bit lower. Maybe you can argue that they're a little bit higher, but I'm willing to put them all in around B tier because I think that the separation between these comps is not as wide as many other people might think they are. A lot of it is dependent on your spot and the amount of flexibility that you have with those particular traits that you're playing. And then you have your 5 costs. In terms of 6 costs, I don't have 6 costs on this tier list maker, so like we'll just pretend, right? So let's just pick like 3 1 costs here and just rank them. If we're talking about like, I don't know, Victor, let's just take a Amumu's Victor here. Victor really strong. I think Mel is really strong, and then I think Warwick is 1 tier lower. The 6 costs are hard to rank because it's very situational. I think Victor, the stun is massive and is really broken. I think Mel, the survivability and just like the damage amp on your board is insane, and she has a lot of HP, so she's really strong as just a unit on board. And then Warwick, I think, is the one that often does nothing, but if you get good items for Warwick, or if you have emblems, all of a sudden Warwick is like the best one. I think Warwick is like the best with an emblem that just pops off. Victor is the best like just whatever, and then Mel is the best just to like if you actually have items for her as well. She just does like an insane amount, and she has huge survivability for your board, and she does that thing where she saves you 1 life. But anyways, one last time, these are the tier lists. This was mostly for fun, like I said. People were asking me to do one, and that's why I'm doing it. So, you know, I'm going through my list of all the things that I promised people in order. So that's what this content was. If you like it, please make sure to like and subscribe. But like I said, I'm going to flash it again. This is mostly for fun. Every unit can have use, of course. It's more so just like how excited I am to see them and how I would rank them relative to each other. I think the balance of the units this set is one of the best I've seen in almost all of the TFT that I played. I think they did an amazing job, and I think we should all be feeling pretty happy with the way things have worked out so far. We still have half a set left to go, so hopefully you enjoy the rest of set 13. I'm doing this video today because tomorrow I'm actually going to be out. So tomorrow's video is probably going to be on pivoting. So I have to make a couple videos. I basically have to do all of tonight. I'm basically doing all of the weekend uploads. So excuse me if they seem a little bit rushed or not as polished as some of the other ones. But hopefully they're still enjoyable. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.